Welcome to the second episode of Export Film. My name is Jack.
And my name is Ben.
But before we start, if you haven't listened to the first podcast that we did,
What the fuck are you doing?
we talked at length, 2.5 hours to be precise, about Mike Leigh's Naked. So if you haven't listened to that, if you haven't seen the film, get involved and drop us an email, whatever you want, and tell us what you think.
Of course.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about Wim Wenders' classic Wings of Desire, starring Bruno Ganz, Solveig Domartin, Otto Sander, Peter Falk, and Kurt Bois. So yeah. What are we talking about?
This is part of the series of beginnings in which we talk about the essential films, the foundation myths, if you will. So we should probably start as we did last time. Where's this come from?
Yeah. And I know what some of you are thinking while you listen to this. The first Wim Wenders film that you tackle is Wings of Desire. What about Paris, Texas? Well, we might do Paris, Texas. No, this is but this is the one that we're choosing because this is the one that sort of shaped the childhood. Mm-hmm. And I can't really remember the first time I watched it. I was trying to think before we started, and I was like, I'm not sure, but I do know how I found out about it, and it's as a result of being a Nick Cave fan. Because I'd seen like a little clip where he was in the club, and I was like, that film looks amazing. It's like, and then I managed to seek it out and watched it, and yeah, blown away.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not until very recently that I've seen it. It's probably about a year ago was the first time I watched it.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
It was, yeah. And I was just immersed in the absolute elegy that is that film. I just sort of sat there and just experienced it, just sort of fell into it. But yeah, very, very recently for me.
Oh, right, I didn't know that. Yeah, I think the thing that grabbed me about it, other than it being a tremendously cool film, was how no holds barred it was on the poetic front, like just this elevated language and the monologues that just goes throughout the piece. I was just in awe. I was like, because I kind of have a thing in my head where I'm like, I'd never do anything like that. It seemed preposterous, like no one would take it seriously. And this film changed that a little bit because it was like, ooh, maybe you can do it if there's conviction, which I think this film has in abundance.
The perfect intersection between cinema and literature, I think the poetic images do justice to the language, and the language does justice to the images.
Yeah.
And it's the sort of perfect interplay between those two things. And of course, it is written by Peter Handke as well as Wim Wenders.
And this is where we lead off into Ben's erudite monologue. That also twins as a synopsis. So yeah, if you want to get stuck into that.
So as I said, last week we started talking about the beginnings. We're talking about the films that made us. And we started with Mike Leigh's Naked, a film which we concluded was about a youth who had somehow trapped himself and found himself unable to sort of give himself over to an authentic connection with another person and also with himself. The character of Johnny was one who was imprisoned within his own sensibilities in such a way that growth or change was impossible. And I think that Wings of Desire plays on something very similar in regard to age and time. Reduced to its bare concepts, Wings of Desire is a film told along two timelines, the eternal and the ephemeral. We're introduced to two angels, Damiel and Cassiel, played by Bruno Ganz and Otto Sander, respectively. These angels know everything about the history of mankind. They can recall almost effortlessly every event that happened on this very day across history. They spend a portion of the film wandering around the Berlin Library, content to hear the voices without listening to any in particular, since there is nothing that such an immense repository of collective knowledge can teach them. Rather than meanings, they become one with sound and image at the level of surface and texture. As Damiel observes, they may have seen everything, but neither of the angels has ever had an idea in their whole existence. See, in order to have an idea occur, there has to be a moment in which it's there, but also a moment in which it isn't. It relies on human fallibility and our wonderful ability to forget. And so the angels exist in all time, but they're not properly in time. This is communicated wonderfully by Henry Alecan's exciting camera movements and most overtly the interplay between monochrome for the angel's perspective and full colour for that of the mortals. For the angels, the past means as much as the present, which is to say that it has no weight. For this reason, the angels meet enormous difficulty when trying to change the course of human will, and Damiel particularly chafes against his own powerlessness in the here and now. In order to tell this story, thus, Wenders and Handke weave three narrative strands. The story of a young French trapeze artist who has been told that the circus is closing, a veteran actor making something of a hammy or at the very least unrealistic wartime drama, and an old storyteller. The latter character is credited as Homer, or the storyteller, played by Kurt Bois, who seems to bear the weight and burden of history on his shoulders. In many ways, Bois himself bears the weight of cinematic history, with a career that began in the silent era, his first acting credit being from 1907 at the age of 6. In Germany, he worked with Bertolt Brecht and Max Reinhardt before being forced to flee in 1934. When he arrived in Hollywood, he managed to get a part in Casablanca. Then, unsurprisingly, at the age of 86, Wings of Desire was his final film. A man whose career in cinema spanned 80 years, and his last appearance on a roll of film is the shot of him walking towards the Berlin Wall in the final scene of Wings of Desire. As Bruno Ganz whispers, "We have embarked." Much like Bois the man, Homer is someone who has, unsurprisingly, lived it. He remembers everything in a different way to the angels. He struggles to remember things. He returns to a place that was destroyed during the war, the Potsdamer Platz. His memory is characterized by forgetting, and his song is characterized by an absence of listeners. At the time of filming, Potsdamer Platz had not yet been rebuilt after the war, because it had been divided in half by the Berlin Wall. His final shot stands in a void of Berlin, with the forces of history quite literally cleaving it in two. But as Homer thinks to himself, for he has no one else to speak to but the angels, my heroes are no longer warriors and kings, but the things of peace, one equal to the other. This, I think, is the thread which unites the constellation between all three characters, and what makes Wings of Desire a triumph of storytelling and structure. This is a quest for oneness, which Damiel believes exists in childhood, which Homer believes exists in the valoration of peace, which Marion believes exists in any non-contingent relation with another. Many critics have called this film an ode to Berlin itself, after the style of Walter Ruttmann's 1927 classic Symphony of a Great City. Though they insist, Wenders' interpretation is one that insists on banging its head against the wall, that is, the Berlin Wall. When I watch this film, I see something far more transcendent than that. I see a film that presents a set of binaries and successfully overcomes them to achieve a certain unity. I don't know where that unity exists precisely, nor do I think that its attainment is something unique to each character. Rather, it's a celebration of the present continuous, which is to say, a celebration of becoming itself. And what that final form looks like is entirely irrelevant. I think we should probably think about this in terms of isolation, because this is very much a film which showcases the phenomenon of interior monologue in such a way that it appears to be fragmented and isolated. There is this sort of, well, you know, as we say, like, individuals are atomized. You know, they're atoms, and atoms sort of collide.
Yeah.
And there's this idea of personal histories
Colliding.
but not touching. And I mean that insofar as when the angels are observing, they're not touching. You know what I mean? They observe two things coming together, but they don't fully comprehend it to the level that they can fully understand how these two things come together after that collision, you know?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
And I think that a big theme that runs throughout the angels sequence, the monochrome sequence, is the collision of bodies with concrete. It's suicide is a very, very big theme that runs throughout that. I'm thinking, obviously, there's the when he jumps from the top of the Europa Centre in Berlin, but also I'm thinking about that scene in which we have the young lad in his room listening to music, and then it cuts between his father thinking about, why can't he at least listen to some proper music?
And he's like, I bought him drums or something.
Brought him a guitar, do I have to buy him the drums next?
Yeah, is he the guy that looks the spit of James Dean as well?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we listen to his mother, she's also talking about his aspirations and music and stuff.
Yeah.
But the kid's sat in there thinking about killing himself.
Yeah.
And there's that sort of, they can't quite put those threads together.
No.
To make it into something. They can't quite fully comprehend exactly what's going on. And I think that's kind of something which characterises the angel sequence.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that it is this lofty language and this lofty style of filmmaking in a lot of ways, which focuses on the day-to-day. And I think this is the art of, to bring it back to Naked a little bit, we're talking about sort of realism in a sort of way.
Yeah.
There is an art to portraying the everyday in such a way that you can make it somewhat eternal. Maybe that's not the right word, but make it sort of transcend the immediate, the immediacy. Because the thing about culture is that it changes so quickly that things don't resonate in the same way, even 10 years later.
Yeah.
And there's a certain art to the day to day that I think that they certainly capture in the writing of that film, especially in those sorts of scenes, as you were saying. Like, it doesn't really matter what he's listening to.
No.
It doesn't matter, if guitar music falls out of fashion and something else comes. It doesn't matter. It's just like a symbol for something much larger and much more commonplace. So they certainly pull that off in their portrayal, and I think that for me is what rescues this from being a sort of obscure meditation, which I think a lot of people think this film is. And what's the not incomprehensible, but like an inaccessible.
I think people, because it's quite contrived in the best way.
Quite constructed.
Constructed, yeah. I think people find it hard to kind of penetrate the emotional core, but I think it's there in a...
I think that people deal with it like it's a piece of sort of high modernism.
Hey.
Which I don't think that it is.
No, I don't think it's...
I think there's elements of that, but I think that is something which is colliding with the late 1980s in Germany.
Yeah.
Which is a very... Well, I mean, we're still in that period of sort of a postmodern sort of conflict of... I mean, what is postmodernism? But the conflict between modernism and our experiences today. Like, postmodernism isn't something which is tangible. Yeah. It's kind of just like, not a negation, but a conflict with that which came before. Yeah. Which isn't just in culture, it's also in the way in which we experience the world. Which is kind of what we were saying in terms of like this isolation. This idea of people being atomized and isolated from one another. There's certainly a through line with Paris, Texas, insofar as that's a failed connection between two people.
Yeah.
Two people who didn't engage fully, didn't give themselves over fully, and didn't completely come to understand one another.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the repercussions of that in the way that Wings of Desire isn't, I wouldn't say.
No.
It's kind of more of an exploration of that which comes before the Paris, Texas.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is a nice little through line.
Yeah, definitely.
Wim Wenders' work. But I like this idea of a division, because we're talking about 1987. You know, the Berlin Wall comes down in 1991, I believe, and that's not a unification of Germany. I don't think. It's kind of a loss of something to compete against. It's a loss of an other. You know, it's a fall of forming a collective in opposition to another collective. And what do you do with unification? What is after unification? I know that that's not happened at that time, but it's very much in the air. Let's say, obviously, this is like the time of like Margaret Thatcher's. There's no such thing as society, just individuals, and that's kind of what's on the horizon. And I think that's definitely present there, and that's kind of the cosmopolitan element of the film. I think. Nick Cave. Being sort of an Australian musician working in Berlin, and obviously the one who that appeals to is the French woman who is in Berlin, and then the angel who is also alien, or at least doesn't understand fully the implications of the social circumstances. Yeah. The fact that there is a sort of confluence and they all come together in this big wide river of cosmopolitanism. It's so interesting that you really can watch this as an ode to Berlin, but you can also see that the individuals are themselves the ones who are unpicking that and are disproving that. And I think this probably would be a good time to sort of talk about like the monumentalism, the fact that the angels literally rest on monuments. Yeah. They're literally like, not only do they look down on people, they literally rest on these monuments that exist in Berlin. And the two big monuments that they rest on is the famous angel with the wreath and the church tower where the children see them at the beginning. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about that is that church tower is a monument to Kaiser Wilhelm, and the actual angel itself is a monument to the Franco-Prussian War. The actual wreath is cast from the metal of the cannons that were used during the Franco-Prussian War. And that's the monument that they choose to look down from. And that, I think the reason why we can't find a very clear and direct way of attacking this film is because it's so many things that are going on. Like I'm saying, we've got this confluence of the modern experience of 1987, but also the monumentalism of tradition, which is literally weighing down on the characters and on us as viewers. And I think that this shows itself most overtly during the scene in which the young man, which we'll come back to, where he jumps from the Europa Centre. Mm-hmm. And we cut to colour where Falky's watching television of himself. And then we go back to monochrome.
Great scene.
We go back to monochrome, in which Cassiel jumps. He himself jumps from the angel and descends down to earth. And we have this fantastic piece of cinema in which all of a sudden, we have Alican's camera just moving so quickly, and like it's completely sped up. It's all shaking. We can't really tell what's going on. Yeah. And we cut between that person who's asleep in the subway, and we go to a woman who's been beaten. We go to a child who's crying on a street corner, and then all of a sudden the fire bombs fall from the sky, and it's 1943, 4, whatever, I don't know. Yeah. It's the mid-40s again. Yeah. And there's that element, there's that idea, I would say, that he starts on the top, and in my mind, that's his fall to earth. That's the trajectory. Like, he starts on the monument, and as he is in free fall, we have this really impressive but quite crazy scene of everything that we see, and then when he hits the ground.
Me of, the start of Persona. That's what I was thinking when I was watching it the other day. Like kind of like using the avant-garde just to like completely separate the two sides of the film.
Definitely, yeah.
That's probably the most modernist bit of cinematography.
I suppose it is, but it works
or editing, rather.
It works so well.
Oh, it's amazing. It's really exciting when you're seeing it, because you've got these slow meditations and the symbolism that you were talking about. Then you've got, it's like a really languorous piece in the best way. It's just kind of like, and then you've got the fall, the literal fall, and then that's when it all kicks off. It's a beautiful, beautiful scene. There's a succession of beautiful scenes. When Otto Sanders' character, what's his name again? Cassiel. When he's observing this guy that's deciding to jump off the building, when he's resting his head on his shoulder, and there's just there's just the scene before he jumps where there's just like we're trying to console is one of my favourite scenes in cinema, full stop. I absolutely love that scene. I think it's beautiful. And then obviously you go from the beatific to the distressing.
Yeah, and the thing which stands out to me in that scene, the thing which probably affected me the first time and stayed with me, is the scene before he jumps and he says, I can't believe I decided to wear red socks with black shoes.
With these shoes. Wicked creepers, by the way. He's wearing some very nice crepes.
And the fact that we're experiencing this from the perspective of the angels in black and white really brings home that idea of complete lack of understanding. Yeah. And I think that that's exactly kind of the emotion of that scene when he puts his head to his back.
Yeah.
Is the fact that there isn't an understanding. There's just sort of a kind of angelic, pure sympathy, I would say.
It's one of the first times in the monologues as well, up to that point, where you get sort of mundane meditations, and I think it's a beautiful choice to have like the most important point in this man's life where he decides to end it, and he talks about the pebbles on the roof. It's just like, why on earth did they put pebbles up here? It's like, did they think the building is going to fly away?
The roof.
The roof is going to fly away. And all these like really inconsequential thoughts that are just going through, and such a well-written scene in terms of what would happen. You know, he's not talking about, I love my mum or whatever, I have regrets. He's talking about the pebbles on the roof, and it's such a genius bit of story.
It certainly is, and I love the way in which that realism, in a certain sense,
they're very overt,
comes into conflict with the postmodern surroundings. So obviously, very overtly, there's the massive Mercedes-Benz sign rotating behind him as he's contemplating. But for me, the thing which stood out the most was the fact that he's listening to a Walkman the whole time.
Yeah, he is.
There's something about choosing the song which is going to soundtrack your fall from a skyscraper, which is a particularly unique to that period and to our period. Of course, I'm assuming that we're still in that time period.
Yeah.
And that's something which we can conceive of today. But it's something which we don't think about often. But like
putting shuffle on before you decide to end it all.
What does that mean? There's having to have a soundtrack for everything. Obviously, that is the idea of the cinematic, i.e. the accompaniment of the visual with the auditory.
Do you hear the song?
No, you don't hear the song. No. You just see him with his big Walkman in his pocket and his headphones on.
That'd be such a stressful decision as a writer or a director, what song is he going to choose? It sort of reminds me of, this is a completely different film, but in Under the Skin, when Scarlett Johansson's character goes back to the guy who picks her up at the bus station, goes back to the house, and there was like, Jonathan Glazer was talking about how in the scene, the guy goes to turn on the radio, and he's stressed about this idea of which song to choose. Like we need a really good song, and then he was just like, look, what needs to happen is you just turn on the radio and it's so much shit. Turn on this TV, it's so much shit. So I think those choices where you just decide either not to do it or you just let something unfurl is a very, very timeless choice.
Of course, yeah. It's just, I think this idea of soundtracking our lives is a very modern idea.
Well, maybe to an extent. Well, mobile soundtracking.
That's what I mean. What I mean. Yeah. Obviously, that's the events occur when you're in motion.
Yeah.
And the idea of picking a song for the most mundane of things. What am I going to listen to when I walk to the supermarket?
Yeah.
What am I going to listen to when I jump off a skyscraper? They're kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah, they are.
They're kind of part and parcel of like every activity has an auditory accompaniment. And I think that is the influence of cinema on our lives completely.
That definitely
because
is.
How many people, listen to a certain song and walk down the street and they feel like they're in a film?
Yeah, I mean,
because that's what it's supposed to do.
Yep.
That's what it's supposed to do. I am guilty of this. I'll listen to something and I'll be walking down the street and I'll be thinking, this is a great opening to a film.
Yeah.
This playing and then just walking down this street.
Yep.
How many times?
I'm exactly the same. I also know that, there are countless pieces of music that have meant so much to me as a result of their placement on films. Like, there's so many tunes, so many classical bits or whatever that I've managed to worm their way, where I know I'm going to feel a certain way if I put this song on because it's been in a film. So beautiful.
And there is like I remember hearing this, I can't remember who said it, but there was an athlete who was talking about working out. And they always said that listening to music while you're exercising is cheating because you feel like you're in the montage sequence.
No, you're Rocky.
Yeah. And I always like that idea that like it kind of takes the pain away, but that's cheating.
Yeah.
Because in a certain sense, what it is it's removing you from the situation. It's not just depriving you of things that you can hear. It's kind of depriving you of your awareness of what you're doing right now. It's making cinematic your life in a way which is perhaps trivially exciting, but takes away authentically, some people would say, from the real experience of living. And obviously in this context of dying.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you only get to do that once.
I mean, it's probably not a discussion that we want to go down, but like, I'm not sure what tune I'd choose.
I wouldn't choose anything. I don't want any. No, I love silence.
Yeah, I love silence as well, but
silence.
Imagine if you're about to do it and like fucking Spice Girls comes on and then Tannoy or something. That'd be horrific. But yeah, you don't.
As you fall down, it's buffering.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want that. But yeah, to completely devalue the emotional
But
resonance.
I think that's a discussion which the film warrants because it really does present these things to us.
Yeah.
They're on the screen, but they're not addressed.
No,
so they're
no.
visually given to us, and that's kind of what I would say is the contradiction between like the literary elements of the writing, but the sort of very interesting elements of the visual. I would say that the writing itself is more modernist in its exploration of consciousness and what it means to be within that stream of consciousness, the time element of it. And the postmodern, which is essentially visual, wired for sound, has to, in turn, present itself to us visually, right?
Yeah.
And I think that those conversations definitely spring out from that film. And you can't portray a suicide with the Mercedes-Benz logo rotating behind the person and not have this discussion afterwards. It's very, very intentional. And obviously the film portrays the people who are the sightseers on top of the building telling him not to jump and he can't hear them.
Yeah.
That's obviously very,
And they look
very
completely
beautiful.
ridiculous, don't they? They look like...
They are the ridiculous
Yeah.
ones.
Just like the mother or whatever, and she's clawing at the thing, and it's just like, go away. Get out.
It's such an interesting thing because you imagine what they're saying, and you can sort of imagine they're saying something like, "You've got so much to live for.
Don't do it.
Don't do it."
It's like, because she said that, I'm not going to do it. Nice one.
It's like they're so isolated. They don't know who that person is.
Yeah.
They exist in an urban city which has millions and millions of people living there.
Yeah.
They've never seen that person before in their life until they've presented themselves.
Yeah.
It would be completely different if they lived in a community where everyone knew each other and they could say, "You've got so much to live for, like this and this and this."
Yeah.
But just looking at someone and saying you've got so much to live for has no meaning.
No, I mean,
you don't need to hear
and
it.
that's what's going on with the angel at exactly the same time. He can't help this man, and he thinks that even the divine presence, the intervention, can't even change this man's mind.
Of course, because he doesn't understand any better than they understand.
Exactly.
And that is the unity between the atomized individuals and the angels, right?
Yep.
Because they're atomized, which they aren't completely, but let's say for the sake of argument, they can't understand the contents of someone else. They can't have that connection in which we give ourselves over to another person.
Yeah.
And that is kind of what the film is working towards with the Daniel character and the relationship that he has with the trapeze artist.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting. I've read a few reviews for this film, good and bad, and I've read people who characterize it as the romantic journey. And, people sort of say that his reason for giving himself over to mortality is in order to meet this woman. And I don't think that it is. I don't think we can reduce it to being this sort of romantic element. There's something far deeper that's going on there. And this is probably where I would say that this is a German film. Actually, no, I'm going to say a non-Hollywood film.
Yeah.
Because if we view this in context with the remake that Hollywood thrust upon us, the 1998 City of Angels, starring Nicolas Cage.
Why didn't they call it that?
Meg Ryan.
Why didn't they just call it City of Angels?
Well, I wonder.
Vim, what you doing?
Yeah, I just wish that City was in the title because it wasn't clear in the film itself. So that is a film. The reason why I lead on to this is that is a film which plays off on this romantic idea. This idea that there could be an angel who can't experience anything human, but is able to experience
Love.
and as a result forgoes his immortality
To have sex with Meg Ryan.
to have sex with Meg Ryan, who is a doctor and not a trapeze artist. Very, very interesting that, isn't it? The desirability of an American audience versus a German one. What does a desirable mate look like? Is it an artist or is it an established doctor? I think what's really interesting is that Wings of Desire ends with a very, very long monologue from Marion. Not from Daniel. He doesn't have a lot to say.
He's in awe. He don't know what to do. He's shaking.
And I love the fact that she sort of dominates that scene in such a way that she's just talking about ideas and everything that's been going on in her head and sort of verbalizes it. There's something beautiful about finding someone who you can articulate and verbalize everything that's been knocking about in your skull for so long. And obviously he knows that.
Yeah.
But that connection is so profound that it completely transcends the romantic. That's what I think, that I don't think that this film, that's why I'm saying I don't think this film is a romantic resolution. I think there's that oneness, there's the ability to find a oneness with the internal and the external.
Yeah.
Finding something outside of yourself which is a locus for everything that's going on in your head is something which is so profoundly beautiful that obviously Hollywood just cannot, I would say, comprehend, but they don't want to communicate that. They don't want to attempt to communicate that.
They wouldn't want a character who actually
find some individuation.
Yeah, I mean, the genius of that final monologue is that, you know, they don't decide that all of a sudden just because Daniel's turned up that she's gonna forego what she's thinking in her head. You know, it's not as if she just fawns over him. She's not. She knows who this man is, and she's like, look, this is the condition. Yeah. This is what I am. This is what's happening, and she rules the roost.
Absolutely. And her end goal is ultimately to be alone with herself comfortably. And I love that idea of finding another person in order to sort of like join everything that's going on in your head with that person in order to truly be sort of alone with yourself.
Yep.
To be at peace. Because I think that part of this modernist element of the stream of consciousness is the inner conflict that's always going on in your head. And for that to find an external for it to find a place in the world, let's say, is something very beautiful and very profound. And for me, that's the consummation.
Yeah.
The consummation isn't Nicolas Cage taking his top off and admiring his physique and what follows.
Look, it's all in the trailer if you want to check it out.
It's only 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
I will not watch that film, obviously.
But what's really funny, because in preparation for this, I watched this Wim Wenders talk, and he gave this amazing anecdote, which I will try to relay. Where he talks about he went to Japan. I don't know whether you've heard of this, but he went to Japan because the Japanese distributors for Wings of Desire, you know, they were going for it with the distribution. So he went over and he really liked Japan, and then he went back because he really wanted to make a film there. He was in love with the city, and the guy who was the head of distribution, said, "Look, before we do, I'm just going to take you to this theatre." And he went, and Vim was like, "Oh right, yeah, they're still showing still showing Wings of Desire a year later." And he went, "Oh, that must be what he's showing me." And he went, "No, I'm not showing you that." And he "Look, let's go in this screening." And we were just at the back, and he went, "Oh, it's full." And he went, "Is that what you're showing me?" And he went, No, that's not what I'm showing you." And he went, "Come a bit closer." And he went, "Look, this is a phenomenon." And he said that he looked, and all the audience members were women. And he was like, "This is amazing! I can't believe that there's only women watching this film. I mean, what's going on?" And then Vim said that he read some news articles on it later on, and apparently they'd done I don't know whether they'd done interviews with some of the women who went to the screening or whatever, and they said that they're so enraptured with the film apparently because it's about men who listen.
Well, that is beautiful. Because that's someone who understands what a real relationship is at the end of the day.
When I heard it, I was like, what a fucking beauty that is.
And just to go off on a very, very brief tangent, this kind of leads into the transition between, moving from the sky or the heavens over Berlin to it being in English and French as the Wings of Desire. And I was reading that Wim Wenders said that... in German, the word desire doesn't exist in the way that he wanted it to exist. He has this little point where he says, desire only exists sort of in a sort of a lusting sense. And what he was trying to convey was not quite that. It was desire, but in the way which we have desire. But apparently, I don't know, I don't speak German, but no. It doesn't exist. Doesn't exist in Germany. And he said that, that was the point. He said, I tried to retranslate Wings of Desire into Germany because he preferred the title, Wings of Desire. Yeah. Because I would have liked to have had just a single title, but there was no word in German for desire. There's just none. It's terrible. There are sorts of words that are either way too explicitly sexual or a way too general. So I had to maintain two titles. And I like that idea.
That's cool.
The fact that what he's trying to convey doesn't have a German word for it, despite it being a very German film about Berlin. What he's trying to convey is something far more universal than that, something which transcends national language, national culture. It's oneness. It's two people, it's oneness. It's what it's all about. It's what it's all about.
Which is why we're there for it. This is beginnings, and this is foundational thought.
Absolutely. This is something which sort of accompanies every sort of relationship. Because the reason why we call this series Beginnings and Foundations is not the fact that when we think about cinema, these are things which, are the first things that come to mind. These are things which we carry around with us, not as burdens, but as things which sort of accompany every experience. Yep. As I was trying to say with making life cinematic, for me, it's carrying films like this with me and looking at the world in that way. And it's not something which is intentional.
No.
These are films which, not for me, I mean, I watched this recently, but I mean, this series is intended to be films which we experience adolescent, pre-adolescent, i.e. before we became who we are today. That sort of formative years when we were still in that process of becoming, and part of the clay which was added to that was cinema. And that cannot be removed. So many times, so many things which we do has this element of, this reminds me of this in this film. Yeah. It's almost impossible. Even, the way that I speak, the things that I say, I'm constantly thinking about the way in which I've heard this before. Yeah. And it's not that I've heard it before personally, I've seen it before. And there's this element of kind of worshipping films and watching them consistently, a sort of developing mantras from films which become almost godlike, and weave their way into consciousness, and they really have sort of changed our lives. And that is a big statement. But it certainly changed our characters, let's say.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, and the whole thing about the films changing with us or the films not changing with us comes into that as well. I mean, that was another reason why we want to go through this. I mean, I have more of a history of this film than Ben does, not by much, but I can't pinpoint when I saw it for the first time.
Which I like. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. What ethereal thing that's going on in terms of
poetry.
Yeah, definitely. And I without it, not without sounding too over the top and melodramatic, but without all this stuff, I just wouldn't be able to articulate anything, if I'm honest. And I think the thing with this film, it's a collision of, in terms of art forms, it's a collision of, it's a bit of a perfect one for me and you, because it's like, it's sort of everything that we like. You know, you've got the musical element in Nick Cave, which is still there. You've got the literature element. I mean, I've only recently got into Rilke, but like I was reading that Wim Wenders was like just engrossed in Rilke while he was like developing the monologues with what's his name again? Sorry, Peter Handke. Sorry, I should know that off the top of my head. And that Rilke's poems definitely do tap into. I mean, it's such a mood, vibe, atmosphere thing that comes with those readings, and that is another part of it. But like, it's just this. All the good things coalesce in such a satisfying way, and because it's just unabashed in its beauty, it's so admirable. You know, just to have this. I mean, there's the focus on innocence really blatantly throughout it, but the film almost embraces cinema from a very innocent place. Like it's drawing from these rich pools.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. It's a nice little through line from Naked, to be honest, where we were sort of saying that when we were adolescents, we really identified with that character of Johnny.
Yeah.
And now we've sort of gone beyond that and recognised that he's not changed since then. And I like that idea that there is a reason why these films appealed to us when we were younger.
Yeah.
And the beauty of this series is returning to and readdressing things that we might have not seen for a while, but as I was saying, we carry with us, but coming with our own baggage now of emerging from that mire, which was adolescence, as everyone's is. And yeah, I just love that through line of youth, which is certainly manifest overtly, but also subtly, I think, in Wings of Desire.
Yeah. I think it encapsulates like an intangible nostalgia, because the film is not a nostalgic piece or whatever, but the ruminations on the sort of essence of being free, in, you know, to wander in the way that the narrative does as well. This like inconsequential thing, as long as they're angels, before he submits to the mere mortal world. It's such a relatable thing, and I think it's a film that it's comforting. I mean, Naked is comforting, but I think Wings of Desire is comforting in a different way, because it's like it's always nice to return to it, because it's like, oh, you know what, it don't really matter. That's what I always think when I'm watching it. It's just like, you know what, it don't fucking matter, and I love this piece, and that's what's going on. Anything outside of it.
And I think it has that same effect on me as well. You're sort of... Naked is a film which probably appeals to my still existent, but was more existent when I was younger, my agitational sensibility.
Yeah. When it's what again, to bring it back to the sort of carrying cinema with you. When I think about it, I end up, you know, getting pent up in a similar way.
Of course, it can bring those feelings which still exist to the fore.
Yeah.
Whereas Wings of Desire is more, as I really like that what you're saying. It's like, it's not, I don't like this banal idea of it puts things in context or anything like that, but I love the idea of every isolated story is in itself given as a piece of poetry. And it is in itself beautiful. And this is sort of a film which you watch and everything you hear, well, read obviously in translation, you could sort of write down that as being a quote that you're going to use in the future or something to remember for pretty much what almost any character says as we're spanning across Berlin and locating these isolated lives and beings. There is at least one line which that character has, which has this idea of being quotable, which has this sort of like, well, it's the idea that like in order to be quotable, it has, you know, we have this thing in our head that it has to be an established author or someone with authority, let's say. It has to be an authoritative person in order to have something quotable. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I've had people quote things back to me of things that I've said, and I don't remember what I've said.
Yeah, it's usually fucking daft shit when I've done it.
Well, yeah, because I have this tendency to return to the same topics of discussion.
Oh, yeah,
the same things to resolve.
Yeah.
And what I've experienced is that people will say, oh, the last time you spoke about this, not in a condescending way, but the last time we had this discussion, you said this, and they lay down this quote, which, this sounds super facetious, but like, you know, I hear it and I go, that's a good quote. Because I'm completely removed from that person. But I absolutely love the encapsulation of that idea that everyone has something eminently quotable. Everyone has something eminently, not just authentic, but authoritative, which they have on a subject. And that subject is their lives.
Yeah.
And the experience of their lives is the thing they're most familiar with. Who's the authority on your life other than you?
Yeah.
And you're going to have these bits which have absolute universal resonance, which is kind of what a quote is. It's resonance mildly universally. And that is just to be able to not just capture it, but continuously recreate it in every single character is so beautiful.
When I think of my favourite films and when I think about Wings of Desire and stuff, I always end up thinking like, why did, you know, what is it about this film? And there's sort of this weird thing where I end up thinking how easily a film could be parodied. And I think this ties into the quotable aspect of it, because like when I think about my favourite films, I'm not going to make a list for you, but like when I think about them, they are so, you know, they're on the precipice of turning into something which is really ridiculous. And I think that you've kind of made it if you parodied. I always think about this because it's like if you are so distinct, and if you know if there's a particular execution and elocution of how you go about this stuff, it's sort of a beautiful thing when someone can identify it and they can, you know, if they relay it back and go, oh yeah, you said this or whatever. And it's just, I love that idea. And I think Wings of Desire it has been unintentionally parodied and abused by the Nicolas Cage. Like to look at the film, I mean, and with all the poetry and all the rest of it, what we've been talking about, you could easily just like, you know, make a preposterous argument of it. There's probably no shortage of, there's no shortage of critics who do the same thing. But I think this essence is a love of cinema which sort of transcends criticism in that way. The same reason why people love, to bring it back to Wizard of Oz, loads of stuff, but like you'd be hard pressed to find someone who hates Wizard of Oz. You know what I mean?
What I would say in response to that is that I agree with you. Imitation is a beautiful thing, and that in order to imitate something or parody something, it has to be something which really exists. You can imitate the way that someone walks because it is so physical and palpable. Yeah. But if we're talking about artistic form, and we're talking about things which are far more subtle, the ability to recreate and parody is not a testament to how obvious those things are and how clunky and sort of overt they are. It's a testament to the ability which something so subtle can become real and manifest for someone else, which Wings of Desire is an absolute triumph in that regard, I would say.
Yeah, I'd agree. Obviously.
And it is only when something exists in the world in that form that the opportunity of a sequel opens itself up. Because what a sequel is, in my opinion, it's the ability not just to channel the spirit of the original, but it is in a way a certain parody. It's a continuation, but there's a very clear cleavage between both films. There has to be that separation.
And at this point, we should probably address the fact that there is a sequel that exists to Wings of Desire. We haven't spoke about it because we like to talk about films in isolation, in their own right, but kind of feels a bit silly if we don't comment on it. So the name of the sequel is So Far Away, Close! Exclamation mark after it, which immediately when you read that title, I mean, neither of us seen the sequel.
No.
We'll reiterate that. But when you read that title, there's an exclamation mark in it. I mean, I think that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's warning signs. That's like, ooh, the only film to successfully pull off a exclamation mark in recent memory is Darren Aronofsky's masterpiece, Mother. Anyone who disputes that, again, email in.
I think that the approach which we're sort of shooting for is, in my mind, I want to experience these films as they would have been experienced at the time. Yeah. Obviously, we can't escape the fact that we're living 40 years later. But the idea of what is to come, I think, needs to be addressed, but I don't think it's a necessity.
No.
So let's pull it back to the actual ending. So the film ends, and of course, you've got this far in, but we are doing spoilers for the ending. Not that this is a plot-driven film. So Bruno Ganz ends with he's on the ground and he's holding the rope on which Marion is performing a trapeze performance. And on the steps is sat his old compatriot, his old angel cast in black and white.
Stuck in his ways.
And there's the beautiful scene of which she is the one who is now ascendant above both of the angels, and he is the one who is literally holding the rope on the ground.
Yep. Content. Completely content.
Content. And he is the ground, and he says, "It happened once and therefore forever," which in my opinion is my favourite line in the whole film. It happened once and therefore forever. And that's exactly his quest. That's the resolution. But that's not the end of the film.
No, it's not.
We cut back to Homer, which, as I was sort of talking about in my little lead-off piece, he's sat in Potsdamer Platz, and he starts walking towards the Berlin Wall. And then as he's approaching, that's not the final shot in the film, we cut back to the sky over Berlin, and then we cut to a sort of elliptical to be continued. And prior to that to be continued, I think that is a fair ending, considering the fact that the first shot in the film is a extreme close-up of a human eye. And I like the idea that the final shot in the film will be a sort of aerial shot over Berlin. Mm-hmm. But that's not how the film ends. The film ends with a to be continued.
Which, for all the love-ins that we were having earlier, is the failure of the film, in my opinion. To present, to have a film that is fundamentally about time, about the nature of being, about
oneness,
eternity, division, everything. To have a film that basically sidesteps and giving us a to be continued, as far as I'm concerned, it might as well have Bruno Ganz waking up from a dream or something like that. I mean, there are plenty of narrative and, as we were saying earlier, Hollywood conventions at play here. There's a lot of things going on, but at the same time, for you to be presented with an ellipses after it is just a bit of a sixth form move, I think. You know what I mean? It's like, well, we've had this build up, such a profound film that's been presented itself, and you've had the Marion's monologue, which ties everything together. Any concerns you might have about where the narrative is going in terms of their relationship is usurped by that monologue, and then you've got Homer's journey towards the wall, which is such a, amazing scene.
As I said, his last piece in film.
His last piece of
life.
film, and then it says to be continued. I mean, it's like Hallmark or something. You might as well say happy birthday for it or something. It's really disappointing.
I just don't understand the contradiction between it happened once and therefore forever, which is saying that every single event which can only happen once is eternal in its beauty.
Yeah.
And this idea of to be continued, there is something which must follow. That idea of to be, like, it must, it presents the idea that this cannot be viewed in isolation, that you must go on to the next film, that this film must become a franchise.
No,
it's
like brings you back to the Mercedes.
I don't
fucking sign.
Which, if that is an intentional move, then fair play. I like the idea because, as I was saying, the interplay between the modernist internal dialogue and the post-modern surroundings which exist in the visual, if that's where they come into conflict at the end, I don't think it is.
No.
But if it was, that's pretty cool. But I don't think it is. And that's the issue.
Yeah, I can't think that that's what was going through his mind. I think that was I just feel a bit betrayed when it gets to the end of it. I watched it last night in preparation for this, and when it gets to the end, you're just like, it's weird because you kind of forget about it. I've seen it so many times, and you forget about the ellipses, and you're just like, oh, Vim, what have you done? And the more I think about it, the more depressed I get. So I try not to dwell too much on it. But it's just please, I'd like to know what our kid said about it. What's his name? I keep on forgetting his name. Peter, the guy who wrote the script, the guy who wrote the monologues. We'll just consult this. Bear with us. Handke. I'd like to know if he actually, because I know he had quite a removed relationship with the film where he was penning the poetic sequences of dialogue and stuff, and I don't think he really had much of say in the film itself. And I don't think he would have liked that.
Of course not.
The implication of something further. It's just like, I hope there's regret there. And obviously, we might review the sequel at some point, but as it stands, we're not particularly concerned. I think we love this film a lot, but like,
this is the series of beginnings.
Yeah.
To view it today and to review it would not be part of that series.
Exactly. So it's a bit of a weird one, and I don't know. There's no comment after that because you kind of like you've had everything that we've talked about up to this point.
It neutralises all the conflicts.
Absolute PH7 job.
But it doesn't in a way because it puts it off into the future. It passes the buck. And I hate that so much. And the thing is that the ending to the film without that wouldn't be particularly strong. I wonder if that's the reason why it's in there. Because, like I was saying, I love that line, it happened once and therefore forever. But the idea of Cassiel sat there in a bubble of monochrome and then cut into him Homer walking towards the Berlin Wall, it's not particularly strong as an ending. I wonder if there was
stronger. It is
stronger, but I wonder if there was an element of an awareness of weakness of that, and
maybe. I mean, once you've had the monologue, you kind of get the sense that they don't really know what to do other than kind of stylize the subsequent events. I still think that Homer walking towards the wall would be a more satisfying conclusion. I don't think we'd be as vehement.
No, I think we would be critiquing it, but I agree.
Yeah, because there are at times where Homer almost feels shoehorned within scenes. I will say this upon reflection. It feels as though there's like, we need to bring him back because there's obviously a lot of enthusiasm towards that character. I
would disagree. I would say that the emotive turn which the narrative takes is one of those where you don't want him to come back. You're so engrossed in Daniel and his quest
I suppose
that to bring back the Homer character is to detract from it and like draw out the tension or the plot. To focus on him is like, oh, I'm completely engrossed in Daniel's story in colour. I'm going back to black and white and we have to do this old story which has been hashed over. We have to return to World War II. Why do we have to do this constantly? And the wall, and like it's an unwelcome thing which you're forced to readdress. And I like that flow.
Yeah. I think it just towards the end when it happens, it feels
irrelevant.
So,
but I think that's part of.
I know that's
we're
the,
on
I know
that
that's the
emotive
point.
journey.
Yeah, I understand that's the point, but at the same time, it feels like there's construction evident in the way that it's edited at that point. That's what I will say. You're getting signposted. It's like, ooh, we're gonna come back to him at some point, and then we're gonna raise up to the clouds and give you an big old ellipses kiss. And yeah, the fact that there was a sequel after that, to be honest, if there wasn't a sequel and it said that, I think I'd like it more.
It's kind of like the Fargo based on a true story.
That's a good one. I think that sort of puts an elliptical ending to this discussion as a whole, does it not? Which is quite disappointing, but what can you say?
Well, this episode has been very, very different from our analysis of Naked, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of an outlier from here on, maybe. I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I think that the strength of this film is that it raises a number of themes which are in themselves very, very philosophical. And they point to other things in a way which Naked perhaps doesn't. What Naked does is that it presents these themes, but the way that it points into them is sort of internal and integral to the narrative itself. The way in which this film does that, it presents very, very similar themes. The theme of time is obviously very, very present in Naked, this sort of impending millennium. And obviously, like, what Wings of Desire deals with is sort of the impending nature of eternity as an angel. Like, such a strange concept, but it really does point beyond itself, and that is something which is a strength of the film, and it has led off into discussions of postmodernism and all these things which we've been going into, modernism and postmodernism, which is fantastic that it does that.
I'm happy that it's inspired the discussion, to be honest, because I don't think I'd want it any other way. I mean, we could, as with anything, we could go into detail about minutiae and stuff. I mean, as a side note, Peter Falk is obviously amazing in it, and there's loads of comments that we could have made about the performances and stuff, but the fact that it has inspired a discussion outside of the film, I think, like you say, is the strength of the piece, and it's why we return to it.
It's always pointing beyond itself.
Yeah.
And that's something which is existent in the Falk character with his love of costumes, this sort of thing where he doesn't know if he's a good actor, but if he can find a good costume to pass himself off as something else, i.e. pointing to something else which doesn't exist, then he can be a good actor. Yeah. That's kind of what the film is encapsulated as being. Yeah. It's the idea that if you can find the right hat, then you can be that which is not you but something beyond, and that's something which is an absolute triumph.
It is, and it makes sense that he is an angel when you kind of think about the process, because he had plenty of time to observe, so all he has to do is literally act.
It's the perfect occupation for a post-angel, a post-lapsarian being.
I wish I was a post-lapsarian being. Sometimes. So, I mean, yeah, it is ending on a bit of a elliptical cliffhanger note.
It is, and it's been a great discussion. I've loved talking about this film. It's a film which is very, very near and dear, and as I was saying, I carry it with me everywhere, as I do all the greats. But yeah, this has been the second episode in the series of beginnings.
Maybe we should talk about what's coming up next.
Of
just
course,
to reiterate it. So the next episode is...
We're taking a little bit of a break from the beginnings series, and we're going to sort of dive into a little bit of a versus, a bit of a discussion.
We are, I'm
the
looking
Kaufman territory.
The Kaufman, which is rife.
I think it is. We're going to talk about Synecdoche, New York, and we're also going to talk about Anomalisa.
Whoa.
So there will be a little bit of a head-to-head in the next episode. It's going to be a little bit less sentimental, a little bit less involved in our own experiences as youths, which this series has been characterised with.
Although when it comes to Kaufman, there's going to be bits.
It's going to be there, but not quite in this sort of sentimental aspect that we've done so far. So I think that the next episode, which you should tune in for, and I think you'll love, is going to be a little bit of a more sort of close analysis of our Kaufman, because it's a rife discussion.
It is a rife discussion. We're gearing towards I'm thinking of ending things.
We are. We've got a review in the works, but I think that without that sort of Kaufman discussion, we can't properly dive into it.
That's kind of what we want to do with Export. Like, we're not going to, especially when it comes to new films of directors that we admire, we will do an episode where we talk about previous films and what has made us feel. But an important one after that is perhaps, in fact, I'm going to say it is
Go ahead.
our most anticipated film of the year. We've been waiting for it. How long have we been waiting for it?
March?
I mean,
Was it supposed to come out in March?
when did
April?
I'm not sure. It's going to be Václav Mahul's adaptation of Jerzy Kaczynski's Painted Bird. A novel near and dear,
Yes, indeed.
and a film which hopefully attests to that. Comes out, well, we're recording this, what is it, the 9th of August? 9th of August now, we're going to watch it on Friday, we're going to ingest everything, and we're going to do a very elaborate review. Bearing in mind the film's 3 hours, so God knows how long the discussion's going to happen, going to take on for.
And we have read the book, so it will...
There's plenty of...
stuff to work with.
so yeah, I mean, if you have listened to this, thank you very much. And...
As we always say at the end, please get in touch with any opinions and, most importantly, disagreements. You know, the agreements are a little bit less interesting, but anything which you absolutely hated, love to hear it, love to get back to you. You can connect with us on Twitter, Instagram, and also on YouTube, and the email.
The email, exportfilmpodcast@gmail.com.
That's the one. Export Film Podcast on Instagram, Export Film on Twitter, and Export Film on YouTube. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye. Bye. Bye.